Indeed, President Joe Biden stated, quote, above all, he cared deeply about the Japanese people and dedicated his life to their service. Even at the moment he was attacked, he was engaged in the work of democracy.
Well, Japan is definitely a, democratic country, and, there's variations of democracy in Japan as just as there is in the United States. But, for, most of the Cold War, Japan was supported by the US in return for the US having a massive number of soldiers and bases on Japanese soil and Okinawan soil. The US gave Japan preferential treatment in its market. And so Japan, the Japanese economy grew substantially through exports to the US market from the middle 50s to today. But the economic growth was based on Japan not having to spend so much on military as the US did. And so instead of investing in tanks and fancy airplanes and fancy aircraft carriers and so on, the state was able to move capital into big, huge projects like their incredible train system they have there, their fast train system, rail system. And so, Japan avoided having to spend hundreds and millions and trillions of dollars the US spent on the military. But, to kind of alleviate the so-called burden, the US has been, pressuring Japan and pushing Japan to become more of an independent military power, always under the rubric and under the control of the US, but to become a more powerful military force, which means that ultimately Abe's goal was to alter the constitution, the peace clause of its constitution known as Article 9, that was imposed by the US occupation forces between 1945 and 1952. And that Article 9 prevents Japan from using a military force overseas and participating in wars. But that's been chipped away bit by bit by these agreements I've talked about in the past. And now, with the Liberal Democratic Party, Abe's party, after his assassination, of course, there was an election. He was campaigning for candidates for the election, and now it appears that the LDP, with a couple of its allied parties, have a majority in the Japanese Diet, which will allow them to finally push through this constitutional change to get rid of the peace clause. And Kishida, the current prime minister, just said today that that is his goal. So that's the ultimate contribution of Abe toward U.S. security interests, and it's a major one. But this is a policy that a lot of Americans have been completely unaware of. Really, it's been done in a very hidden kind of way, secretive way, and so very few Americans are really aware of how deeply Japan and U.S. militaries are embedded with each other.